All right, it's 9:30. Should we go ahead and get started, Rory?
Yeah, let's get started.
All right. Well, welcome everyone to the Digital Leadership Academy. Um, we are going to talk to you today about financial communications made simple. Over the last few months, in particular, it's become increasingly more crucial that organizations are communicating, particularly about their finances, with the vast amount of legislative changes that have occurred, and how those impact your communities. So today we're going to share with you some of the strategies that we've used working with our clients. But first, Rory, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. So my name is Rory Wilson. I am an account lead with the Impact Group. I work with school districts on communications of all kinds, which means that I have definitely been in the trenches with many school districts and other organizations that are trying to communicate about financial information. So with that, I've got a lot of experience in different tactics that I'm excited to share with you all today, and just, talk about the different ways that you can make that information really accessible.
Awesome. Thanks, Rory. And I'm Kaitlin. I am also an account lead at the Impact Group, and the manager of Impact Group Marketing. Um, I work directly with clients to help build their strategy. And like Rory had shared, one of those strategies, particularly recently, has been communicating about finances. So today we're going to talk about the role of financial communications in building trust,
Mhm.
some strategies that you can use to help simplify those communications, and some tools, ideas, and best practices that you can use along the way. So why financial communications matters. We talk a lot at the Impact Group about the DISC profile. And for those of you that don't know what that is, it's essentially a behavior tool that helps you understand personalities and communication styles. So I am a C, which basically means that I like the details, I'm an analyzer. And one of the best ways that you can communicate with me is to do what you agree to do.
Mhm.
And when we think about trust, that's at the root of the matter, right? Like doing what we say we're going to do. And when we're communicating about finances, we're essentially building that foundation and we're doing what we say we're going to do. We're sharing how we're spending our money and how we plan on spending our money and how that is going to impact the community. And that right there is the root of all that we're going to talk about today and why it is so important to share that information so that your community understands that. It demonstrates accountability, and ethical stewardship, and really is crucial to building that foundational trust that you have with your community.
Yeah, that's so well said, Caitlin. And as we talk about this, and we talk about some of the challenges and the different things related to financial communication, just keep in mind, everyone's challenges are so different, but when it really does all boil down to trust, because you need to have that open line of communication with your community and all of your stakeholders on a topic that is so complex.
Yes. Um, and that is part of the challenge, right? We're looking at really complex information, and there's a lot of misinformation and misunderstanding around how government organizations are funded in particular. And often when we think about mistrust, that is caused because there's people are feeling like there's a lack of information. So the goal here is to kind of combat that. Like we want to give them the information. It's not always necessarily fun information to communicate about. It can be really difficult information to share, but it can also be really good information to share. If we when we communicate about finances, it's usually because there is a levy coming up or there is an issue when we're going to have to make cuts or something along those lines. But it's also really important to remember to communicate when times are good too, and when you've got a successful audit and you won the Auditor of State Award, like that information and those communications are equally as important um, when we talk about financial communications.
All right, so to start off, we want to share some really important but simple principles with you all to help you set up that baseline for communicating about finances. So the first tip that we have for you is to be clear and to be simple. Clarity and simplicity go a long way when we're talking about really complex topics. So, breaking that information down into really simple key takeaways, never underestimate the power of a few bullet points to summarize really hefty information. I know that when I'm scanning through something, I want to see the bold key takeaways that I need to know, and that will help me know where do I need to focus in on more? What don't I understand? So never underestimate the power of a few bulleted key takeaways. And then also just using plain language and avoiding jargon or specific terms that might not be accessible to other people. Um, Something that's really important to remember in communications is that a lot of people, the average reading level in the country is at about a middle school reading level. So when we think about taking a complex topic and making it accessible to everyone, we're already talking about terms and potentially, things happening at the state level. These are really complex ideas, and we have to make that presentable in such a way that your average person that isn't in that world will understand. And sometimes just taking a step back, rereading something, or trying to present it in a different way can just really help simplify that and boil it down to the essence of what you're trying to communicate. And then lastly, just asking yourself, what is one thing that you want your audience to understand? Taking that step back and asking that question, reflectively, can really help just set up the message that you share in the long run.
Yeah, that's one of my favorite questions. I feel like it helps you really boil down to like the main point of your message.
Yeah, and when we think about the way, there's the way different communities operate. I know I work specifically with one school district, and we have learned over time that their community responds best to
Yeah,
information
can you come over?
presented in
Can you come
like
over?
a graphic or a visual way. So just understanding what resonates with your community. Can be really helpful in the way that you present that information in the clearest and most simple way.
Yeah, and that's a great lead in to our next core principle. Um, and really thinking about your message and who it's going to. Different audiences have different needs. And so, what your staff needs to know and what your community needs to know are going to be similar, but your staff is going to probably need a little bit more detail or a little bit more specific or be concerned about what the specific impacts are for them in that role. And just thinking about when you're writing a message, who it's going to, what their questions may be when they receive this message, and how you can kind of proactively look at that and answer those questions in your message ahead of time.
Yeah, and as you think about these different levels of, stakeholders, everyone does have a different baseline of information already. And people have a different understanding or knowledge of where they can go to get those updates. So something that, we strongly encourage is to just be really consistent and to utilize really every platform that you have to direct people to information and make that as accessible as you can. Because a board member or a council member is going to know a lot more about your organization than maybe a community member who doesn't have a really strong direct tie to that day-to-day information. So just letting people know where they can go for that information. Don't assume that because you say something once in a board meeting or post it once on your social media that people are going to catch it every time. So just being really intentional about understanding that those different audiences will be, looking to different locations for their information. And then also just remembering the power of print communication, specifically with audiences that maybe don't rely on digital communication as often, or maybe older audiences that aren't on social media, and just really tapping into that as a resource for you.
Yeah, that's a great point. I know in my community, we have a primarily older audience when it comes to like voting time and things like that. And it's really crucial for, um, our city and our school district to communicate in print forms because that's the way that they reach the broadest audience. All right. And then core principle number three is proactive versus reactive. And this is where that concept of communicating, even when you're not on the ballot or when there isn't a challenge, comes into play. And thinking about ways that you can communicate about finances all the time, whether it's sharing baseline information to help build understanding or just sharing kind of positive. Information about where you currently are as an organization, and just giving people the ability to kind of follow along with you, help anticipate questions and concerns, um, and really just try to be as open and transparent as possible.
Yeah, and we're going to share coming up here in a little bit. We're going to share some specific examples of ways that you can do that. But just keeping in mind that you really do need to build that foundation or that baseline of knowledge. And there's a lot of different ways that you can do that, but just remembering that you know, communicating when things are good is so powerful too. Not just communicating with people if there's a need or if there's an issue or something complex that's happening, because that's truly the power of storytelling. And we're going to talk about that a little later on too. But just really keeping that in mind that if you're intentional from the start, it really does come back to building that trust and making sure that your community and your stakeholders know that you want to tell them what's going on and you want to share what's happening in your organization, whether it's, positive or maybe not so positive.
And then tools for financial storytelling. So there's a lot of different ways that we can communicate, and communicating in different ways is really important. We know as communicators that people need to receive information 7 to 11 times before they can truly understand your message. So just communicating in one place in one way isn't going to be enough. You're going to need to communicate on your website and in your newsletters and on your social channels. Um, and even through different ways. Some people are really receptive to videos. Some people need the written word to understand. Some people, like Rory mentioned, love the bullet points and that kind of quick takeaway, and other people might need more visual information. So thinking about that, using charts and infographics and all of your tools to communicate is one of the best ways to help set up that storytelling.
Yeah, and when we think about a story too, that story is built over time. Um, you don't just tell the story once and then it disappears. The story is being built. The story is part of your organization and who you are. So that just comes back to, really regular communication and that baseline of trust. Do people know where to go to hear your story? Do they know who to talk to? And then as you integrate that into each of these different channels, whatever that may be, whether it's your website, your newsletter, your social media, or hopefully a combination of all of those things, then that's how the story is built. And if it's present, and if it's consistent, um, people are going to want to read your story, and they're going to want to hear what you have to say.
Yes, that's such a great point, Rory. And here too, when we think about tools, tools for us is AI. Like, how can you use that to your advantage? It's a great thought partner in trying to break down some of these complex ideas, and having AI explain kind of these complex ideas to you, to then use that information that you now have to explain it to your community, um, helping brainstorm different ideas, to simplify complex information. It can really be a beneficial partner, thought partner, as you're communicating about complex topics, even beyond financial communications. And here's our example. Our video is just going to
True
play.
cash is calculated by your total expense.
So there's here's a few examples of things that we have worked on for clients that have been really successful. So I work with a school district who, over the last 3 years, we've implemented what we've called Finance Fridays. So essentially, this is every Friday, we're communicating from the treasurer's office and from the district as well, um, a financial fact. It can be as broad or as detailed as we want. We've communicated about grant information. We've communicated about just like general levy facts, like what is an operating levy? What is a bond? Um, and just even repackaging and recycling similar information over time has really helped create a foundation of understanding in the community so that as they have ballot issues or other things come up, we aren't working at like a ground zero of information. There's already some understanding about what these terms and what these words mean.
Yeah. And what I love so much about that tactic is Kaitlin said they've been doing this once a week for 3 years. Something when I talk to treasurers a lot of the time, the big question is, what are we going to say? Like, what's the topic? Like, what are we going to talk about? I mean, this is something that, 3 years of content and you've never run out of a topic to share with the community. And like you mentioned, recycling that information over time, like that comes back to the repetition and the importance of always having a present communication, regarding finances, whatever it may be. But it's definitely comes back to building that trust. And you might be surprised, you have a lot more to communicate than you might think.
Yeah, definitely. And like in November, levy information is always going to be relevant. It doesn't matter if you're on the ballot or not, because they're probably hearing it from somewhere else. So really just repackaging, recycling, thinking about relevant topics during that time, it really does. There's plenty to talk about. That next example there is a treasurer's message. And really, this is an important tool that we use with a lot of clients because your newsletters, um, that's a consistent tool that you have to use to communicate. And it's also longer form. You have an opportunity to say more there. And we took, in this example, a really kind of complex idea of spending and expenditures for salaries and benefits, and what that looks like compared to other districts around them, and used graphs and charts and those bolded bullet points to try to break down a lot of really complicated information, so that even at a glance, you can get a better understanding of where they're spending their money, how they're spending their money, and what that means for them moving forward. And then that third example is a video example, which you got a little bit of a preview when we switched the slide there. But really, video is another tool that you have in your toolbox to share information in a different way. And when we talk about financial communications, particularly, finances can be dry. Apologize for anyone who loves to talk about finances, but it's not always the most interesting information, most engaging for the audience. But when you think about video and hearing from an individual, you're automatically more engaged when you're talking to a person than you are just reading some information. So video is a great engagement tool, particularly when we're talking about something that can be difficult to engage with.
All right, so a few more examples to share with you all. This is a really good example of a communication that you can send out proactively. So this was actually a series of pamphlets that we released from a school district who knew that they might have an ask or a need coming up within the next several years, but came to their attention. What does our community really know about, number one, school finance in general, number two, about our specific district's finances? So this became a series of 3 pamphlets that were actually mailed to all homes in the community, which is a little bit of a bigger lift when you think about, a financial commitment to putting out a piece, but also it ensured that this information got to every household. But this essentially, we started with the first pamphlet, which explained some really higher level information about school funding. And then through the second and third pamphlets that we mailed out, got more specific into the specific district's finance. So that was a really, really great way to share some proactive communication. This next example up on the top right of the screen are a few pages of a district newsletter. And Kaitlin shared a really good example of a treasurer's section in a district newsletter. And this is a little bit of a different example or a way to utilize a newsletter as an existing platform. So this particular community that we were working with, they were just, in a position where state funding changes were really going to affect them. And in being proactive and thinking about how we might communicate with the community, knowing that there was a levy ask coming up in the future, they actually devoted an entire edition of their newsletter to be a special edition about finances. So if you know that you have something big coming up or something that you really need to devote the space or the real estate in a newsletter to, make it a special edition. Say, we believe that communicating about finance is so important that we are going to send home something fully devoted to sharing that information. And then I just want to call out, these are two separate pages from that newsletter. And the first was an area where we tried to be highly visual because we knew that community really responded to visuals, to bullet points, to, more graphically represented information. And then on the back cover, we kind of flipped the script on that and included a FAQ page. So for those people that prefer to read, just again, that proactive idea of what are people going to ask? What do you know that, you can pretty much predict, like, this is a question that we think people are going to have about this. Ask the question and write the answer for them to anticipate that. And then finally, the last example on the bottom here. This was part of a series similar to the Finance Fridays graphics that Kaitlin described, but part of a monthly series on communicating finances. And we focused specifically on grant funding in play within a school district. And this is a really important piece where, like, if you've got a lot of grant funding or donations that are coming in that are empowering really important projects, that's another piece that you need to communicate up front, because people may see, things being built or new things coming in, and they're going to say, where did that money come from? The assumption will probably be that those are district dollars being spent. So telling that positive story of, we had, our great team of educators went out and got this grant funding for our school district, or we have a strong community where donors were giving to the district to help us accomplish this great thing. So it's not always about an ask. Sometimes it's just truly about celebrating those wins and sharing with your community the wonderful things that you can do with those dollars.
Yes. And so the core here is connecting dollars to outcomes and to people. We talk a lot about storytelling and the impact that that has. And here are essentially 3 questions that you can use to help you think about and frame your story. So what did this funding make possible? Who benefited? And what problem was solved? When you can answer those 3 questions, you're setting up a really solid message to your community about the story of your finances. And then here is the complicated one. So recently, I don't know how many of you are aware, but there's been quite a few legislative changes that have impacted government funding, particularly for school districts, but overall affected government funding. A lot of property tax reforms, limits to revenue increases when we look at reappraisals. And that has had significant impacts on school districts and local government funding, and what the budget and planning and long-term effects will look like, um, has an impact. And it's important that we communicate that. And if we're asking ourselves how we start communicating about it or why now, this is an opportunity, for you to start, communicating about your finances and what what these changes look like for your organization, what those impacts are, what the problems or the challenges that are ahead, and breaking down and trying to proactively answer some of those questions from your community. So to recap, clarity builds confidence. So as clear as you can be in your communications, will build trust with transparency, and ultimately engage your audience and help reduce misinformation and that sense of distrust. So we have a challenge for you as we wrap up. We hope that after this webinar, you'll identify one financial message that you can simplify this month, and share it. And use the people around you or your community even to gauge understanding. I like to use my husband as a test, for the information. Rory and I, were sharing, we both do this, but he's very removed from the work that I do, and he's a great test. If I can share a story, or a piece of information with him, and he's like, yeah, I get what you're trying to say. I know that I distilled that information properly. If he's questioning and it's not clear, then I'm like, no, there's still some work to do here. So if you can pick that message and use someone around you to kind of test and evaluate how you've done, that's the challenge that we're going to leave you with today. We'll stick around for a few minutes. If anyone has any questions, you can unmute or drop them in the chat. And for the rest of you, we will wrap up and just thank you, for attending this webinar with us. If you can't tell, Rory and I are very passionate about, communications and strategically communicating. So we really enjoyed our 30 minutes with you, and just sharing some of the work, that we are really passionate about.
Before you guys go, you guys both did a wonderful job. Can you just expand just briefly on the power of telling your positive story, the power of because you're building trust and just making sure that people are aware of the good things you're doing. And Rory, I love what you said earlier about buildings going up, and if we don't tell them that it's grant dollars, whatever, they assume others. So could you expand just for a second about the power of telling about the good things that are happening in your community, what you're doing?
Yeah, absolutely. So, when something that we like to remind people is that if you are not telling your story, then somebody else is.
Mhm.
So that's why it becomes so important to, acknowledge the things that are happening in your district. So, for example, what I shared before about, grant dollars at work. This specific community had the opportunity to literally build new facilities or additions to their facilities, and that was completely grant funded. So as a community member, maybe driving by a construction site, seeing things go up, that's a really tangible, visible thing that they can see. So if you don't fill in the gap about how that's happening, they'll draw their own conclusions about that. And grant funding, donations, those are things that we really want to celebrate. So being able to share in those celebrations is a really powerful way to tell the story about the good things that are happening in your school district. And sometimes it won't be of that magnitude or on that scale. It might be really, small things happening here and there. But even if you communicate those small things, in such a way that it builds that story, people will want to continue to hear your story long term.
Yeah, and it honestly builds really good community partnerships too, because you have an opportunity to, even if it's not grants, but it's someone making a donation or a partner coming in and giving time. It's a chance to thank them, and you're sharing that you're being resourceful, but you're also building those partnerships and that connection outside of your community.
Hi, this is Dan Wilson. I'd like to follow up with a couple of comments that are also questions. In my experience over time, I find that those that pay the most attention oftentimes are senior citizens and non-parents. That we already have a connection with parents and booster groups and local governments, but uh, I was born way back in the last century before you young ladies, and I go to the YMCA here in Geauga County several days a week, and with a group of seniors for water aerobics. And as we talk about school funding, the number one concern that they have is, well, I got this letter from the county auditor saying my home's worth 23% more. That means my taxes are going up 23%. And again, I know it's somewhat of a complex conversation, but I think it would serve us all well to find some simplified way to say, first of all, it's a really good thing if your home's worth 23% more. And secondly, your taxes aren't going up 23%. And again, that connection with the a large percentage of our voting population, and as I've seen, particularly here recently, levy results, it seems like the pushback is it's going to cost too much. It's not from the parents, it's not from the booster groups, it's from those non-users of public schools that don't understand. So have you developed some techniques on kind of simplifying that fundamental concept of property taxation?
Yeah, so there's a lot right there, Dan, and I think so much goes into what we're about to talk about. So I think what's really important when we talk about external people and people that aren't immediately involved is the importance of storytelling, and being able to share all of the good things that are going on in your organization, whether that be a school, a city, a board of DD, because when people understand, when people can draw a direct connection to the impact that you're having, it's going to be a lot easier for them to say yes to spending more money. If they don't have that sense of what your organization does or that ability to draw a direct connection, it's a lot harder. So overall, I would say the power of storytelling is really important. We've also worked a lot, particularly with a couple of my clients on school district clients, on sharing that information about assessed value and what that actually means around reappraisal time. So in like 2023, when that happened, a lot of our treasurer's message focused on you just got a letter that said that your house went up by 23%. Here's what that actually means. So we gave them a tangible example in that newsletter and said, if it went up by 23%, it's actually your taxes going up by this amount. In that kind of real life treasurer's message example in a newsletter that they're going to get in the mail, that broke down those details.
Yeah, and Dan, I think just kind of based on, kind of the scenario that you were describing with like the portion of the population that you're referring to, that opens up, another interesting conversation about how to communicate with that population. So that kind of ties back to knowing your community. So as Kaitlin said, like we can write a really powerful message from the treasurer and we can explain it in such a way, or, you know, put it into a video format. But I think what it's really comes down to is connecting with that population. So if you know your community and you know that, let's say the senior center, or, you know, whatever that place is where people are gathering, the first thing that comes to mind is, can you make a connection with that organization? And maybe they'll allow you to have your newsletters there, or to have a flyer or a message put out for people to collect. Or do they have a screen that you can display some type of piece of information on? Or even just, you know, tapping into those individuals if they have a real interest, connect with them specifically, and allow them to become spokespeople. Well, maybe not spokespeople, but part of telling your story. Explain to them how this affects the community and what it means, and then allow your people to help you tell that story.
Thoughts?
Do we have any other questions?
All right. It doesn't look like it, Rory. So, with that, I think we will wrap up. We will share the presentation and recording of this in an email probably in about a week. So keep an eye out in your email inboxes for that. But thank you all again for your time and for your questions. And if you have any questions or want to talk to Rory and us further, please feel free to reach out to us. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.